Today, about face, we get to draw the whole face. So a few pointers. As usual, I'm going to show you the materials I'm going to use. I have a 2B. I will be using an HB, 4B, and work my way up to a 6B. So I want to use at least 3, maybe 4 pencils. At least 3. But work your way up to 4. And we'll go over how we do that. So pencils, remember, you could start at 2H, highly recommended. I'm going to start with an HB so you could see my lines a little earlier. They have to be light. Remember, we work from light to dark. So I'm going to work my way up through 4 pencils, hopefully. I will be using a paper blender or a Q-tip or these acrylic brushes for blending and smudging my graphite to create nice form of value light. I have these erasers, my kneaded eraser, which I could just shape, and I have this Mono Zero Tombow, which is really just beautiful to draw light back into your drawing. Now, you don't have to have these tools. Pencil and eraser, you're fine. I do recommend maybe getting a tissue paper or a Q-tip if you don't have your paper blender. Not using your finger. Finger and graphite do not mix well if you have some oils that you can actually feel on your fingers. Even if you don't feel it, it could react with the paper and the graphite, create a little shine that you're not going to be able to get rid of. And another tool that I sometimes use and recommend for portrait, you have to have a proportional divider. And this is going to allow you to take measurements and bring them over so you could check and be more accurate in your measurements. But pencil is fine, just as well. I did want to show you something very, very quick. Some of the things that I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to show you here on my iPad. And woo, look at that. We have double image there. So I have my portrait. This is my subject. I'm going to be saying it over and over. We look at our subject. The more you look at your subject, the more you can see. Remember, this is an exercise in observation. So what are some of the things I'm going to look at? So one of them is I usually recommend find the biggest, simplest shape. So if you could see here, I drew a line from corner to corner of the eyes. And the first thing I realize is it's not horizontal. There's a tiny little angle to it, to the eye line. So if I capture this angle, this line, and then I drew from the corner of the eye, not that I have to draw them, but it could help you. It's one way. You can visualize them and then kind of light grid it on your paper. But notice that if I go from the corner of the eye right through the edge of the lip, or the mouth, I'm sorry, on both sides, I'm going to have this triangle. And I could much easier to draw this shape, this triangle, where you could actually see how the angles and the length of the lines match on your paper in order of proportion. Some of these lines, where do I place them? You could place them here, as I did, corner to corner, and through the corners of the mouth. I also saw this one here, where you could just take the corner of the eyes, and again, same line, and then right through the edges of the nose. And it begins to give you clues of where everything else begins to line up. One more, and because you can't see what I'm looking for, but I'm showing you now, I'm going to be looking also for some of these. So when I draw my mouth, I noticed that the edge of the mouth, if I were to visualize a vertical line that goes right over that edge of the mouth, notice that it lines up right with the edge, just a tad to the right of the edge of the iris. And the edge of the nose lines up right with the edge of the tear duct. So you find these references in your subject and you visualize them and then you bring them over. So that's what I wanted to point out. And that's what I'm going to be looking at when I set up my drawing. Now, one more thing. I wanted to show you this before we start. I may go this route today just to make it easier on you. And it is depending on which medium you use. Sometimes it's easier, and I say it all the time, if you just squint really hard. And I just made you do it. So if you were drawing, looking at the subject on the screen, what I'm showing you, when you squint, this is what I would want you to see. Now, if you were to draw what you see on the screen, right now, if you really truly draw what you see, you're going to see some blurry shapes that are either lighter or darker. And it is much easier to map them out in order to arrange and then begin to show you step by step. Sharpen, and then sharpen it a little more, and then fully sharpen with the final details. You should be thinking of working this way. From biggest, simplest, no detail, to a little sharper edge, more light, more shadow, to just a little more contour, form, and then finally the detail, which is just a few pencil strokes, a few layers, and that's how I'm going to go about this drawing. So let's go right here. And I'm going to go full blur, starting with my HB pencil. I am going to look for that measurement. So I'm looking, where does this line up on my paper? Now, I want to make sure the space from the top of my frame, so the edges of my paper and the length of it, I want to make sure I don't want to draw the eye line right here and have so much leftover space here. I want to accurately pretty much place it where it would belong. So I remember it's not horizontal, and I'm just giving myself just a quick measurement. This I rushed, and it's a little too high. So I'm going to bring it a little bit lower, and I'm going to give it just a little bit of that angle. Now the two things I'm looking for here, the angle and the space from the end of the line to the edges. So I don't need to go all the way here, and it's not closer to the middle. It's right about there, and it ends right about there. Now measuring the angles. Here, how do I even see that line? Well, I'm beginning just to see, it's a little bit less. I exaggerated it just a little. And remember, we want to keep it a little bit clean and organized. I am making my lines a little bit darker than I should. That's so you could see them. But you want to make these lines so light that you have to actually get really, really close, and then you see them. So at 3 feet, or the length of your arm, you barely even see them. But they're there to guide you. Next thing I want to do is, I'm going to find that angle that I was looking for, which is right about here, in order to try to visualize that triangle I showed you in the beginning. So I'm looking at the corner, and sometimes if you have a printed reference, so you have a printed image that you're working from, you should take a ruler to it and just draw the lines right over it. Anything that can help you see it better. And I think right there, I have that triangle that I was talking about early on. Now, how accurate? It should be much, much easier for you to tell the angles and the shape of the overall triangle if it was captured or not. And if I were to show you again what I was looking at, that triangle, where it points to, and how it matches what I have on my paper, how close do I need to have it? What's important is overall shape. So this is the biggest, simplest shape I could start with. I could go one bit further, and I could look at, from the corner of the eyes to that second angle that goes right through the edges of the nose. It goes right about here. If I haven't mentioned it, notice my grip. don't use your writing grip to draw. Use your drawing grip to draw. Looseness, range of motion. That's what you're looking for here. Remember, this is just practice. And there I have it. I have my 2 triangles that I was looking for early on. I have a reference, and in my memory, I have that visual where the edge of the nose is going to line up with the edge of the inner tear duct, and so on and so forth. So now what I want to look at here, and I could begin to do this. Why would I blur the image so much? Well, I have here, when I'm blurred, I could begin to add, instead of line, I'm looking for these shapes. So I have this grid that kind of points me to where things are. I know this is the edge of the eye. And very loosely, I'm going to begin to add a little bit of, remember, this is ultra light. We're going to begin from light to dark. You do not want to add anything beyond what this pencil gives you at 0 pressure here. So what I'm looking for that shape that looks like a fish, the shape that looks like a dinosaur, that looks like a croissant, whatever it is that you see that is simplified and easy to read, that is not line, but instead just basically copy the blur. And we begin to see how, for example, there's a little shade here. There's more shade here. So if you're squinting, you have an advantage. If you're not, then you're guessing. Because what squinting is really, really for is to show you, sometimes visualizing and having those lines almost all the way through. It actually shows you the position of where those shapes of shadow truly belong. Just a little bit above the line. And I'm just giving myself more markers, simplified markers, as it gets lighter. There's a nice area here. So I know this, in the visualizing, points right at that area of the upper lip. So when I have those lines, and I have a clue like this, and remember, we're visualizing these lines. Notice how it points right at almost the middle of the upper lip. So when you have visualized lines that, and they don't have to be these, you could come up with your own way of designing, seeing the easiest structural lines that give you the clues that you need to in order to simplify. It points here. Do I see the shadow? Well, right now I'm not looking for much. I don't want to get carried away. I know it's just below the tip of that. And it goes right to the other edge. So just a little bit of shade right here. It's going to give me what I need. And just above it, it's going to, with a simple measurement, just give me the extra that I need. Now, can you begin to see, and I haven't done this as I should yet, I'm going to go ahead and use the Q-tip for this part. I'm going to go ahead and blend it in with the Q-tip just a little more. So layering, softening. You could also use your paper blender here. Remember, we haven't used barely any lines, the structure lines. Everything else, I was just laying down graphite so light that I could just tap it and lift pretty much all of it, which sometimes you want to do once the use for some of these lines is gone. You could clean up a little, but can you see that already we have sort of Halloween theme, a ghost showing up? Ooh, I could begin to see it. And if you saw how I just laid down a very, very soft. Just looking for the simplest shift in light and shadow. And I kind of skipped, I did rush a little bit through it here. You want to be a little more specific, finding some of those lines. Doesn't go too far below, but it goes a little bit higher. It's not about the precision of it. Now that I see my lines here, I see that this shadow does not go into this triangle as much, but instead goes more outside of it. And it also has an angle that I could easily find where I could add more graphite lightly, coming right to the edge, which I know the edge of the mouth will line up right here. Now this is a portrait that we are going to take the entire class to draw, so a whole hour and a half. We should be patient. More than anything, find the level of patience to measure, to layer, to not rush. I'm trying to find the thickness of the upper lip and just intuitively. And I could make a measurement. That's where you use some of these tools or your pencil, where we could measure on our reference. What's the relationship between the thickness of the upper lip and the lower lip? Is this part of the upper lip thicker or thinner? And if so, I measure it here. That means it would be here. And my lower lip would end right there. Now, the accuracy of that measurement is going to say a lot later on. Can I move it? I should give myself right now, I'm doing the same thing here again. I'm adding more of the shapes. I'm forgetting that it is, matter of fact, you have to look at it almost as if it were an abstract thing. Abstract shapes that you're trying to come close more than anything in terms of light and shadow. Which one, where does it get a little bit darker? And where does it get a little bit lighter? You also need to begin to think about the direction of the lines. So for the most part right now I've been using diagonal lines, and they all have been consistent all the way throughout. Here, I want to make the same decision and maintain that consistency. And as you can see, it begins to show up. So how you prepare yourself, how you set up this foundation, and you can feel, there's maybe a little less space here, make a few measurements, maybe clean up a little more. And step back just for a second, take a look at it, take a look at the reference, take a look at yours. And I think we have enough work here in terms of light and shadow that we could unblur it just a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And unblurring means I just want you to see how from here to here, your focus begins to, sharpen, obviously. And then the temptation is to get darker, get sharper, get more linear. When in fact, what you want to do is maintain a good rhythm of slowly building up from big and simple and light to darker, smaller, and more complex. Well, let's not forget about some of these lines now. Some of these, not lines, I'm sorry, but some of these shapes that are not as dark, But as I squint, they begin to pop up. So I'm going to take a quick measurement here. Very quick measurement. Where is my middle? And what I'm trying to find is if I take a measurement from here to the middle, does it match? And I need to know where that is. It's right there. So I know where that belongs, and that is my line that allows me to develop a little bit lighter. My biggest tip, forget that you're drawing a face. In this case, forget that you're drawing a nose and simplify the elements just to light, shadow, shapes, directions. The moment you begin to think nose, cheek, nostril, it gets away from you. It gets a little too complex. You want to keep it in the back of your mind. And why is that? Because, well, there's issues of surface and texture, maybe. It's not like you want to completely forget. But if you stay true to simplified shapes, simplified readings of light and shadow, you are going to have way more success. And you're going to find that there are very, very simple ways to basically deconstruct or dissect the pieces and then put them back together. So what we've been looking at all the previous weeks, we know how we're going to develop the shape of the eye, the inner. So we look at the eyeball and we look at the thickness of the lids. We look at how the light is affecting it. We know how, for example, with our nose, we seek, and by the way, I mentioned this may look familiar because we have drawn this nose and this mouth before. It was our drawing from last week and the week before. But now we're putting them all together. So that's one way to make things a little more complex. I'm still working with my HB. At some point, I'm going to want to move to a 2B, but I don't want to do that yet. I want to go back to the way we did the mouth last week. We looked at shapes, so my ovals, and I could begin to see them a little bit better. Begin to work with the shadows. And remember, as long as you stay away from lines, meaning drawing the outline of it, but slowly rendering the light, still with an HB in my case. And then using your blending tools to create more layers and really begin to manipulate the light. And in the end, it's about developing your personal technique. Breaking a little bit of light into this edge of the shadow. And I bring one of my favorite tools, which is the little brush that cleans when I erase, but also blends beautifully. And as I said before, it feels like I'm painting with graphite, but I can shape. Don't like to overdo it though, because you could easily overdo it. Well, what about all the other big features that you're forgetting about here? For example, what about the side of the face and the chin? Yeah, well, and in this exercise, what I wanted to is for you to use the methods that we've used so far in the previous weeks and go about how do I develop, because it's not like you have to work exactly like I am. I'm just presenting different ways, different methods for you to see what that does not feel like it would work for me. Actually, that sounds like it could, and it does work, or it gives you a good feeling and you like the results. Then you take that and run with it. So just adding a few structural lines, not committing to it. Very loose. Here and there, we do a few cleanups as we get further and further with our lines. We take out those lines that may cause a little bit confusion or take a little longer to erase. It'll be a little more difficult, in fact, in the next layer. So we do it now. Not forgetting that we're working with forms, in this case roundness, light on ovals and circles and cylinders, light that turns towards and away from you, in relationship to what you're saying, of course. I feel like I'm avoiding this area a lot, so let's get to this. It's because I'm a little further away too. So I have my measurements here. I had that line, and I know that that's my corner. And I'm going to shape. First, I want to see biggest. So we started with that eyeball. So I want to kind of see it there first. There are exceptions. You could jump from, okay, I know where I am in terms of shading. All I need to do is sharpen. And when I say sharpen is add more contrast to the shapes that are already there. Very lightly. Find where they line up. I'm talking about corners, high, low, and I begin to look at the shape, and most importantly, the thickness, the three-dimensional aspect of that eyelid, lower eyelid, upper eyelid. But not taking it too far. Just, again, next biggest, simplest thing. We could call that simple. And I'm seeing them as shapes. Don't forget to squint. Continue squinting. And how you see it here on your screen, the image that I have there for you, how you see it there is as far as you should be trying to take it. Don't go here yet, where it's like all the details and all the... Eventually, we're going to work our way there. And the other thing is, remember that where you need to be looking is at your reference. If you're looking at your paper more than at your reference, I think it's the one and biggest, other than the grip, one and biggest piece of advice that I know is going to help you. how much you look at your reference compared to how much you look at your paper, and how much you trust, how much you begin to trust what you begin to see. So measuring how long are you looking at your paper compared to how much you're looking at the reference. And you'll find yourself saying, well, how am I supposed to draw if I'm not looking at my paper? It's finding the way to, as you see it, connect your eye right to the tip of your pencil. And you'll begin to get a sense of how the light, how the contour, how the true shapes, and the shifts, the very, very subtle shifts on the surface and what the light is doing to them are truly taking place. Or at least the closest thing. I'm going to get in here just a little bit because I do see a little shift in value, a shape of it. Now, how much? I just want to hint at it. Because I know it's, what I'm doing is layering, basically. And I hope you get that point, that notice that even though it looks like I'm doing detail, in fact, I'm not at all. I'm really, really just layering shifts in the value and the shapes that I read as shifting value. What is a little lighter? What is a little darker? How you manage your technique. When do you layer? When do you blend? When do you work the light? And when do you come back? When do you shift pencils? So this line was so helpful because now it points right at the opposite. Know exactly where I am here, just inner part of the eye. I also know how high when I look at my eyeball. I know how high and how, this being my equator, how high and how low I need to see my lines. And they almost line up, showing me all of the answers here, really. Just below, just a little high. And again, shapes, shifting value. Now it gets a little trickier here. It's a lot of dark in here when I blur it out. And I know it's not so, but again, trusting what you see. So looking at your reference, and coming right at it. Stepping back, stepping away. We also have a little bit of face, or it's not looking directly straight at us. So this head is kind of turning away from us. So there's a little trickery there with measurement, meaning as soon as one eye begins to move away from us, it appears smaller. The perspective shifts. There's a lot less light here, but there's more shadow here. And I'm still working it with an HB. Very lightly. But looking at my reference almost 100% of the time, I truly do really work that way, where if I almost want to be surprised when I look back at my paper if my lines went whoops. But the character of those lines, the idea that that could happen, and you'll notice that the more you practice it, it'll happen less and less, because you'll develop the observation skills. Which is, all in all, the real trick that we're looking to develop here. But we could see already the lining up. Some of the shaping should begin to come through you much easier every single time. Taking a measurement, which one's higher, and really, really trusting what you see. That is just key. I'm beginning to shift the directions. Notice I was working diagonal. Now I'm shifting the angle of it, especially where we're beginning to layer and get a little bit darker, a little bit smaller. And you can notice how there's already also beginning to be a fold, concave, convex type of reading. Trying to get a little bit, again, light is going to be tricky here. It's a beautiful rendering of an eye, so I'm not going to put much here. I'm just sort of describing the general shape, trying to get, more than anything, the expression, the position of the iris, to see if I'm capturing the beginning of the expression. So which direction is she looking? More than anything, is it matching? A little bit of light and shadow in here. When I squint at it, you begin to see it. And the beauty with graphite, so many layers that could just blend right back into the previous, but never lost. It gets richer and richer as you add more and more. So, not last week, but the week before, we talk about the volumes of the nose. You remember the front, the side, under, and how we developed the lines that were easily read as three-dimensional. So you could see the top, if you call it the top, side, bottom. I see it more as the front, side, and under. But I still, without reading anything else, but shifting grays to darker blacks, no black actually at all. They're all just variations of grays. And gently begin to get a little more Again, biggest, we get smaller, but at the same time we get a little bit more complex with the shape. And just like magic, it reads as a volume almost immediately. I'm using really, really light pressure on this brush, and that is the best way that I know to bring out that soft shifting of light, especially in and around the eyes, under the nose, delicate area of the lips. That's pretty much where you put your focus. Adding a little more graphite to this area. Beginning to see it a little bit clearer as a bigger, darker shape. Shifting grays. There's a lot of reflected light as well, especially right at the edge over here. So I'm going to play with that. And again, layer after layer, whether it's brush or sometimes just bringing the paper blender again. And I got to tell you, with paper blender, you got to be really be patient, careful, because it, more than any other tool, it could really bring out unbelievable qualities, but it could overdo it very easy. The friction, paper on paper, so you have to do it lightly, patiently, and also the direction you blend, meaning, are you just up and down? Are you following the curve? It's a little easier to get carried away with it. We're going to run a couple of... There we go. Just a few lines of light. Bringing it right back in, and notice how it really just starts coming together. Little by little. Okay, so now I'm going to switch over to a 2B. The other thing is you want to maintain your tools sharp, your pencils. So I want to go, let me remind you, we started here. We went here. Now I'm going a little less blur. So I begin to see a couple of sharp, just a few sharper lines. I still can see shapes of light and shadow. That's what I'm looking for the most. I begin to see a little more sharpness in them, a little more shift. How I decide and where do I decide to go back? Squinting gives you the answer. When you squint and you see, oh, this area right here. For some reason I went right there. Now eyes always are a focal point. So it might have been that, but it also seems as the area here, that takes us right into the mouth. Very light touches. Notice I'm grabbing the pencil all the way at the end, as absolutely light as possible. Very soft motion, very loose, very light. Just adding more graphite for me to play with as I round. Adding a little more. uniform. Areas of gray. Notice also the direction of my pencil strokes. It has somewhat of one direction, this back to that diagonal. Lots of shifting grays here. One of the areas you have to be very careful how to handle. One little shift and the whole likeness goes. The rounding of our volumes here with the lips, I could use a little bit of, it doesn't have to be all straight lines. It could be a couple of scumble lines, sort of rounding or circles that also give our muscle tone just a little bit of shift. Now I like to do that two ways, with my line of course, but also I'm going to do this area here just a little bit before I move on. But with the brush. I'll keep reminding you, looking at your reference when you're doing this is the key. If you take your eyes away from your reference, it means you're making up information, especially when it comes to light, especially when lines are this light. So building up, building up, building up through reading the light. Just picking, seeing the variation, contrast of light and shadow, and building it up, building it up, building it up. Now I'm showing you one style of drawing. Maybe this is not your style. Maybe your style is more expressive, more loose. That's absolutely fine. Maybe, just maybe some of these techniques can help you a little bit with the look, the final look of the portrait that you want. And it's the patience it takes to build it up slowly. If you do follow this method, when you begin to see that the moment you rush, you can lose it. So here I have no graphite, but I'm using a little bit of the graphite left on this paper blender to kind of soften this area up, round it, try to capture a little bit of that structure underneath. So here's where your knowledge, experience of the thing. So not just the shapes, but understanding what the structure is doing, how you go about it in order to follow those lines. That's part of the trick. How light is playing on or behind. And we actually did this nose and it was a lot of fun. because of the way the light was working just outside of this area here. And we go back to a little more pencil, this time a little more controlled. Notice I grab it a little bit shorter, not all the way at the end, but a little bit halfway. I use my pinky to kind of give me a little, just a touch, very soft so I don't smudge. And a little more buildup. Very light pressure. And guess looking where? At my paper? Nope. At my reference. Mostly when you feel, okay, I'm going to do these details now. If you are not looking at your reference, when you begin to perceive, okay, this is details, so I got to really focus here. So I just look at my paper, and every now and then I'll glance out back at my reference. That right there is, you may not realize it through trial and error over and over. It is the thing that takes you away from connecting with your subject, with your object that you're trying to draw, no matter what it is. Unless it's from your imagination, then visualizing that and how you go about that, keeping your mind, your eyes in that image. If it's there in front of you, you need to look at it. You need to continue deciphering, simplifying, and realizing it's only little shapes. Shapes that shift in value. And I'm supposed to catch the shape and the value. That's about it. And more, as we get closer and closer to the goal line, to the finish line, then we get more and more patient. And believe it or not, softer and a little slower. More precise, yes, which means a bit of a closer look, a more focused look to the area that you're deciding to work with. And sometimes just taking a second or 2 or 5 or 10 to just look at it, and don't go further unless you are sure that, yep, I'm on the right track. I may have said this before, also caressing that graphite right onto the paper. The way you manage and you do that makes your drawing really, really unique. We all apply graphite on paper completely different. And it relates to grip, pace, pressure, and we call it our own creative way. Sometimes the energy that you're bringing in, beginning to see just shifts in the darker areas, but it's not sharp yet. So I may be thinking, I'm getting ahead of myself. What almost begins to look like detail, don't go there yet. Work your way slowly. Maintain and don't break that rhythm. All this hard work, all the way to now. The moment you add a sharp, dark line, that goes just a little too far, you may lose it. But slowly building it up. Continue building it up. Let's go to the opposite side. And sometimes it's how we approach that moment with looseness, relaxed, as opposed to really trying to be exact and precise, therefore a little tight, stiff, can make all the difference. And when you say, whoops, what happened? And you went a little too far, it may be too late as well. Because a lot of the work that has been done all the way to this point, learning and realizing with experience through practice and practice and practice, more and more studies, how to manage that so you don't do it, meaning going too far when you needed to go just a little bit slower. Slow down that pace. And I'll give you one example here, for example, with the eye, where you want to begin to darken the area and let it slowly develop a little bit further. Why go here and sharpen those lines, darken those lines, when we could get information developing here and here that may shift? And that means if I go too dark, everything else may have to come up. So subconsciously, I could be forced to draw a little darker. And from one little thing to another, in just a few strokes, we get that feeling that, oh no, I went too far. I shouldn't have gone that dark so fast. And trying to bring it back, we're going to lose other areas. So it's hard to explain. There's many variables that I'm trying to, but I'm sure you've been somewhere like I'm describing, somewhere there, with a previous drawing where, oh my God, this is looking so beautiful. And a few seconds later, wait, whoa, where'd it go? What happened to it? Oh no, it's gone. And most likely impossible to bring back. So being patient, having a strategy. And the strategy that I know works, guaranteed, is stay as simple as possible, as light as possible, as long as possible. Gonna bring down a little more sharpness. So we're here at the end now, full sharpness. And oh my goodness, the temptation to go really, really detailed, which is what I was just talking about a few seconds ago. How do I avoid that? Piece by piece, little by little. With a strategy. Notice me adding little by little I did stay away from this area of the lip a little too long. It is a little bit lighter, but in terms of shaping it, you want to work throughout. You don't want to leave one area too undone. And that's the thing about going too far, where you want to finish an area and everything else looks undone, and then you're catching up. It's best if you have a pattern, work your way through, organized, where you're seeing it come together in those beautiful stages that keep showing you, making it easier and easier and easier every step of the way. Now, I wish you could sense the amount of pressure I'm adding here. The only thing I'm doing is grabbing it a little bit shorter, and I'm going a little bit slower, which means I'm going a little extra over a certain area. And I have feels like complete control over the tip of the pencil. And guess where I'm looking? The whole time at my reference. The lines are that loose. Right now they're so patient. Measured would be the word. That I don't doubt any movement is going to land very, very close to where I want it. Because I'm not doing this type of gesturing that's big. It's getting smaller. And if it goes off a little bit, well, I'm checking. I'm having a feeling for it, where I know I'm going to be in the vicinity. And even a little bit of line off of its position could actually make it a little bit more interesting, a little richer in terms of quality of line. At this point, I begin to use more and more brush, more so than the paper blender. It's just the way I like it. I feel it just gives off a much more realistic sense of light, and also a little it's not as precise, but the paper blender does. It works extremely well, more precise, but easily grays out a lot of the line work, which is what I like. And what do I mean by the line work? Where you could actually see pencil lines, and it's not just smooshed gray. Here, the brush allows a little bit of both. That nice shift, light, shadow, where it gets grays, and they're not consistent grays as I shift the pressure, but there's also a little bit of the line left over. It's not completely washed away. The key to the eye, the thickness of the eyelids. So slowing down my line. Beautiful, beautiful shift in light and rounding. And a little bit more bone structure. And I think what I was talking about earlier, not leaving an area undone and moving away from it too long before you have to come back and you feel like you went back a few stages. You also lose your sense of place where you are in terms of how you're seeing the drawing. So imagine if I had to, I have to go back to that beginning structure. It's just kind of going up 10 flights of stairs and then, got to go back to first floor. No, you want to work your way and make sure you're ready to go to the second and then the third. And that more than anything is what I mean by strategy. That you're working your way towards. I just gave you an example of working your way up or around. However you visualize it. It should be clear in your mind. Now I know one thing is really troubling me here. It's the lack of shape around and also the hair. We'll get to that and how we're going to come around with some of that, as I have not worked it in at all. But that happens when I begin to sharpen some of my edges. More slow build up. Still working with the 2B, and there's going to be lots of shadow that I need to build up down here, where you absolutely do not want to rush. You want to make sure you layer, and I know there's reflected light and light that's turning. There's volume to the neck. So absolutely having the patience to do that. So I'm going to say it again. Are you looking at your reference more than you are looking at your paper? I hope so. It's exactly what I'm doing right now. I'll tell you when I look at my paper. And yes, it's kind of in the peripheral vision. So am I looking at my paper? No. What's in I could see it, but I'm not looking at it. My focus is on this shape, this shadow here. And the pencil shifting direction. So I could somehow match and apply my technique. I remember using more paper blender here early on. So I'm going to try to match that once again. As my first layer, then bring the brush. As I apply a second layer here, I want to maybe shift the direction of the lines where I see a little darker. I should also consider shifting pencils. Not too sure. I've kept it so light. I have a few extra layers to go with this 2B. So what I'm doing is going from first layer, paper blender, to adding almost a degree of extra shadow and then brush. I think that, to me, is satisfying. It really gets me. It makes me feel, yep, captured. Getting there. In terms of light and shadow, reading some of those volumes. It's happening. Before I move any further, I'm going to add a little bit of extra gray, even though we have a nice reading here. Just a few strokes where, again, it's identifying shapes, not just going full dark, but just bringing it up one extra step. Not thinking of it as details. It's the one thing I want you to stay away from as much as possible. Where you think of any of these added lines as adding detail to your drawing. And I know it's tricky, I know it's tough. It takes a lot of focus to stay in a simplified mindset where you're seeing one thing in its basic, absolute simplest form. Well, in this case, shape. So let me go ahead and bring it up to, I know we're getting close to the end. So I'm going to bring it up to a 4B, and I was going to work, this would be my third pencil. So going to the fourth pencil may be a jump. So I go right back to where I almost always started with the shift in the values. And now we begin to feel like, okay, these are finishing touches. The big shift in the darks, but with ultra light pressure. It's not just pushing to dark, but just going up one pencil that is softer, creamier, yes, darker. But notice I did go a little too dark right away. I would build this up so much slower. In degrees of dark. You could see the shift, how we build up, and boom, all of a sudden, it looks like I added ink. The idea would be to continue slow, paced, layering, capturing smaller and more precise shifts of these darker shapes. And not to forget, if I haven't said this today, I should have. Never, ever, ever forget the most important thing. To have fun with it. Have to find a way to, this is the reason we do this. It's because it's fun. Knowing where to pump contrast. Notice this little area here where I'm just touching a little bit, and I'm going a little bit faster than I should. I know it. But just notice what happens here when I add that little bit of dark there. Look what it did to the sense of volume. How this goes way back there, and then this comes way forward. So using that knowledge to your advantage, deciding where to bring out your contrast. I remind you, your best friend is squinting. How you see. When you squint, what you see there. And how you interpret that and bring it to your paper. When we see what you saw as important, and let us see how you masterfully use that knowledge of, light, shadow, shifting, it's coming from this direction, meaning the volume will do this, meaning come forward, and not going too far. Notice here I might have gone a little too dark. It's competing a little bit with this one. So how do you bring it back? We bring back the light. And with the same amount of pressure, I'm beginning to use my kneaded eraser to manipulate how I decide to lift up some of this graphite and create a little bit of light patterns, reflected light, sharper edges. Don't want to rush it just to finish it, but I hope you get the idea, the general idea, how this as a method or a strategy that you could see and discover how it absolutely helps you see better. That's all it is. Or see it better. And I know we're coming to the end, but I can't stop. This is so much fun. Just a few high contrast. One little touch here, this shape, squinting again. So with that in mind, going back to the beginning, where you started, the way you designed and structured those eyes on the first week, seeing how you capture these and how the whole thing comes together, and what kind of simple techniques, I call them tricks, you can use to really bring out the expression of your subject. And then little by little develop more, sharper, better, simple ways to stay focused and to understand what it is you need to see every step of the way for you to have more success with portraits. I hope you guys enjoyed this series. Lots of work, lots of patience, but it was a lot of fun.